So, welcome everybody. I am delighted that we have the very beautiful Indigo Dawn with us today. And of course, all of you, those that are joining us live and those that may end up watching the recording. I'm really excited that Indigo has said yes to being here to help us all learn together. And I'm using this really as part of my Pride celebration this month. I'll have another guest coming in a few days, also talking about Pride. But we are going to celebrate, literally covering the ABCs of being LGBTQ. Could keep adding letters, but Q plus. And we are going to create a safe and a brave space to make mistakes. I've already made one, which Indigo very lovingly corrected me on. So it's okay not to be perfect in this space. It's okay for us to all learn together. I've no doubt there's plenty I'm going to be learning in this conversation. So thank you all for being here and a huge welcome to you, Indigo. Yeah,
I'm glad to be here.
great. I'm glad I could hear you. I thought maybe you were muted. So why don't we start with your pronouns? I know I didn't say we were going to go in this order, but that was my faux pas today. And do you want to start perhaps by sharing about the they, them? I would say Elle, but you might say something different. So
Yeah, so as you can see in my name, Indigo Dawn, they, them, ella. And I put that because Spanish is the second most spoken language in the USA, which is where I live. It's where I do most of my even online events. Has a lot of participants from the USA. So it's instead of Asia or Ajo, ella or elle.
well, I'm kind of putting you on the spot to explain that right away because many of my patrons know that I am living in Mexico and I am studying Spanish. I'm only 4 months in, and while it's getting better, I'm much better at French. So when I saw, I think you're saying ella or ella. Is that how you
Um, it's ella or ella, depending on
the region?
regional pronunciation.
Okay, so ella, I think, is the part that I'm in. I'm pretty sure. Anyway,
Um, yeah. For she, her would be Asia.
okay, but for they, which is non-gender specific, just give me one
Yeah, it
pronunciation.
would be AJ.
AJ. Okay. So even though I'm studying Spanish, to me it read French, and I was like, we've actually talked about it twice already. But I got the refinement and I loved it what you said that, oh, the textbooks aren't going to teach the gender neutral pronoun. So I was already learning 5 minutes before we brought everybody else in to join us. And I thought that was a great jumping off point.
Mm-hmm.
So, just to share a little bit about you and I and how we know one another, we met for the first time a few years ago in Southern Oregon at a pretty transformational event. I know there's at least one of my participants on the call today who's been involved with Network for New Culture. And oh, thank you. More information for our participants there in the chat. But we met at a gathering of about 110 people. And I have this vision of you in the big tent space where we would come together for sessions. And I just experienced you as dynamic and ready to have your voice heard, and but also with a deep sensitivity that really stood out to me. I feel like I believe I'm a little bit older than you, although let's not go over that too much. But but I was just like, wow, like the next generation that's coming up, they've got their shit together. So I was so impressed by you.
Mm.
And to kick off the Pride celebrations, I really wanted to introduce you to my audience, and not only to have me learn, but to learn alongside them from the wisdom that you bring to the table. So thank you again for being here. And Indigo, for those that are meeting you for the first time, could you just tell us a little bit about who you are in the world and yeah, what you're passionate about in terms of this work around gender?
Yes, so I am a personal coach and touch therapist, facilitator. I basically live and work to usher in a world that deeply embraces abundance and um, humanity for all humans. And so this is one way I bring that world is through not only just being true to myself, connecting to the words, the labels, the ways of showing up that ring true for me, but also creating a space that welcomes and feels safe for, feels welcoming for um, other people's behaviors and labels and truths, including around gender, sexuality, because language frames thought. So there's a lot of different um, labels that I, upon learning, realize, oh, wow, that was me. So my hope is by sharing some of this, it'll demystify and maybe open up those windows for some humans on the call or who watch.
Great, I love that. Thank you. And it genuinely feels like I can come to you, and we can come to you with like our I don't want to say, like windows for dummies, but our our questions that we don't really feel safe asking anyone else, because I don't know about other people, but sometimes I'm so worried that I'll offend somebody and I don't want to say the wrong thing. If anybody resonates with that, you can put a thumbs up in the chat or put a thumbs up uh, on your screen. But yeah, I get a little nervous, even though I do a lot of advocacy around sexuality and some other issues. So I think another good jumping off piece might be to I'm very straight passing, and I love the picture we used of you. Such a gorgeous picture that we used for the promo material. But you, at the time, you had like these shaved things in your head, and you had the cool haircut. I'm not saying your haircut now isn't cool, but like, it is signaling to people that there's something awesome about you. And I mean, I have a lot of piercings these days, some seen, some not as easily seen. But in general, I can pass for very straight, but I actually identify as queer. And I know that that word, I actually remember when I was first introduced to the word, it was maybe 12 years ago. It can mean lots of different things to different people. So can you share what queer means for you? And then I'm happy to fill in what it means for me, even though, I feel like I look very straight. Most people probably label me as straight, and it's not necessarily true for me. So,
To me, so queer is basically just outside of um, the cis heteronormative gender and sexuality box. And cis heteronormative means ways of thinking and um, behaving that reinforce the idea or built upon the idea that there are only two valid or existing ways of identifying and behaving, and that's as man, woman within that gender binary. And specifically, that the only valid types of relationships, or the only valid type of relationship, is between a man and a woman. And of course, there's lumped underneath that that is a sexual relationship, that's a romantic relationship. And so queer is just outside of that.
I really love, we didn't pre-plan these questions, by the way, you all. So thank you. Because that actually, it feels like it gives me more permission. Because for the longest time, I'm like, I don't dress cool enough. I don't have the cool haircut. Maybe I don't even, date enough people that are not of, I don't believe in the gender binary anymore. But anyway, I tend to date people with penises. And I was like, maybe I don't qualify. And I actually said that to a lover once. He called me queer. And I said, I'm not queer. And we have a couple of other ways of expressing sexuality that are alternative. And he said, well, you're definitely not straight, honey. And it was so true. This particular lover happened to be quite comfortable as presenting as a man. He happened to have a biocock and was quite lovely, but danced all over the gender spectrum. And it was one of the things I so enjoyed. He did use he pronouns, but I loved it because I tend to be a pretty dominant, or as we often say in NeoTantra, yang, which is like a more penetrative or more sort of aggressive. It can often be associated with being masculine, but I feel very comfortable being a cisgendered woman. I like being a woman. But it doesn't mean that we have to stay stuck in these little stereotype boxes either. And I often get feedback, oh, you need to drop into your feminine more. I'm like, I love being a woman like this, even though I'm very young. So dating queer men for me is actually a really exciting thing because then they're not threatened. We can dance in that play space and one person can take charge versus the other. And I also notice my queerness a lot is actually about advocacy and inclusion. At my NeoTantra events, I don't teach in terms of a gender binary. I believe there's more. So gender binary means you believe in two genders, man and woman. Well, that definition doesn't even just work for me. So there are many people that it doesn't work for. Some people feel different at different times, right? Can you speak to that when people, like some people feel connected all the time to one resonant gender, and others, maybe it changes on the day. Or I know we even have a community member in common who uses different names depending on which part of self they want to express at the time. So can you speak a little to that?
Yeah, so I'm going to lay a little groundwork, go back to the A.
Thank you.
And then go to the B. So there's gender identity, which is how one feels in relation to, among other things, the societal constructs of man and woman. And so that's an internal, like, felt sense and relationship. And so that's one thing, gender identity inside. And then there is sex, biological sex, and that is separate from gender identity in that it's not a felt sense. It's basically doctors look at the baby's genitals when the baby's born and they assign a biological sex at birth. And that's what biological sex is. It's from the medical establishment. So that's where the terms assigned male at birth or assigned female at birth, AMAB and AFAB, come from, which result in then, like, I was assigned female at birth, so then that's like female. And gender identity separate from that is like non-binary, man, woman, trans, etc. And we can stick with that for now. And so what you were talking about was different gender identities. So for example, I pretty much identify as genderqueer. There's a way that for me, I love labels that break me out of the boxes. Like for me, labels are not about containment or limits. The labels I prefer are the ones that give me as much space to color outside of the lines, to scribble, to be messy, to like be whatever I want to be, really, as much as possible. And I mean, genderqueer just basically means identifying gender identity outside of the man-woman binary in some way, outside of like traditional gender. So especially outside of the sex that was assigned at birth to that person.
Well, it's really helpful to get some of these definitions because I might actually post it for my patrons after this. But Alison Moon, who she's written a number of books, but she wrote, I don't want to say this wrong. Anyway, I will put it up for my patrons. But she's another sex educator who did a video on labels, and she's like, if you want to call yourself a koala, and you get a whole lot of other people that identify and agree with what the definition of a koala is, and you all want to identify as koalas, be koalas, right? And I just love that because obviously she's making a joke, like most people aren't going to identify as koalas, but you can be whoever you want to be, and that may even change at different times, right? Depending on who you are, or who you're playing with, or how you identifying, or even geographically, it can change. And so that's part of why I'm asking you to share what the definitions mean for you. Now I know what the binary means, but let's just make sure that we're all still on the A. What does moving outside of the gender binary mean?
It's different for every person, and it is really personal. And in general, so I'm going to paint my representation of like the gender binary is man, masculine, broad shoulders, muscles, and like likes to penetrate with his penis, and likes to fix things, and is tough and never cries, and is always up to carry things, and makes the money and stuff. That like blah 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 blah. Man wears manly clothing, the type of clothes that are in the men's section at stores. And then the woman box within the binary would be things like is soft and submissive and cries, is emotional, is more irrational, is worse at math, likes to be penetrated by a penis, likes to be dominated or needs to be dominated, is less capable, should always be available for connection, is broadly my woman box. The one who takes care of kids. And for everyone, these boxes are going to be different based on their upbringing. And basically identifying, behaving outside of that binary is just saying these two boxes, either neither, both, or something weird that like the person off the street who just looks at me and has these boxes in mind, they're not gonna see me. They're not gonna know me. They're not going to understand based on their assumptions, or what those assumptions are is not true.
Right, because not everybody fits into nice, clean little boxes, because people are more complicated than that, more
Yeah,
interesting than that, right?
yeah.
Yeah. I notice when I'm in India, I actually, and I love India, but I have a hard time when I'm there because everything is very delineated
Mm,
in the gender binary. And because the binary is no longer just a true thing for me, like it's even hard to know where I'm supposed to stand, because I'm like, well, why are there only two options? Like even to pray at a temple, there's like you have to divide, and I'm like, what? Anyway, in other ways they clean that up because they have non-binary deities as well. So in
mhm.
some ways they've got it dialed in, but in
Yeah.
other ways still learning. And for those listening in again, I one of the terms I've coined for myself is I'm a baby queer, in that I feel like I still have a lot to learn even in my queerness. And I'm loving, we're getting some great comments in here. One of our participants was just saying, I'm a queer straight woman. I love that. And that this person sees being a queer straight woman as a political identity as well. I'm going to go to some of the questions. So, one of our participants is interested to hear how people who identified as bi in the past may have shifted. I love this, as the binary has been blown to bits. Anyway, who may have shifted, as we move out of this. I mean, society's just accepted the gender binary for so long. So, what's happened to that bi label?
So this is very personal. This is getting into sexuality. So I'll go back to A again real quick. So within sexuality, there is allosexual. That is one who has a regular emergent drive or desire for sexual engagement or stimulation or connection with other humans, allosexual. And then there's asexual. There's asexual spectrum. So for now, forget about asexual, but within allosexual, we're getting into, that's where you have heterosexual, homosexual, bisexual. I identify as omnisexual, and omnisexual, real quick, means that I have attraction to people of all or many genders, but it's not 100% equal. Like I do have preferences.
Ah, I love hearing that. Okay, so we're allowed to
Yeah,
still have preferences, even
totally.
when we want to be inclusive.
Yeah. And so bisexual has connection to the history of queerness. And so there is contention in the community, and I've actually had these discussions with my partner, because she, at least she used to identify as bisexual, and I was coming in there, I was like, no, because bisexual means there's only men and women. And she actually taught me that that is not true to the historical usage of bisexual. Historically, it was used to say, I just love it. I want to have sex with everybody. So in a way, it was the most inclusive label. And so I find they're including my partner, people do still use it in that inclusive way in accordance with the historical usage. But I have um, a tendency to be very literal. There's a way, like, it's an autism lookalike tendency that I have, is my attachment to, no, bi means two. So I can resonate with both sides of that issue at this point.
And speaking about this idea of omnisexual, I've heard people identify as pansexual. And is there a difference to you between omni and pan?
Yeah, so I used to identify as pan, and then I realized, so when people, most of the time I've seen people identify as pansexual, it's because for them, they're just attracted to everybody and they're like, oh, a human? Ooh. in whatever way. Uh, and even then, people who are pansexual still will have resonance on an intellectual level or not, or they might still only want to date kinky people versus vanilla people, or they still might only want to date people who share at least two different interests with them. There's people who like cooking and dogs, or so these people are still very complex human beings. It's just, this is the label. If someone identifies as a certain way, that's just the best box they've found so far. It generally means that if someone identifies as pansexual, they're probably likely to have sex or romantic connection with somebody almost regardless of gender, uh, but not necessarily regardless of other characteristics.
Okay, and how does pan and omni differ? I'm still not clear on.
Yeah, so omni is, I do have preferences based on gender.
Ah,
Yeah.
I like it that there's permission. I'm learning so much today. So I still get to have my preferences. Because I've tried dating women and um, I really like playing with women, but dating them is so complicated. And so I tend to date uh, queer men actually most of the time, but which is really ironic because often they want to be fucking each other and not me. But it's one of the things I like. It's one of the things I like about learning to have queer sex, because a lot of heteronormative sex is all about putting one bit in another bit, normally a penis in a vagina.
Yeah.
And that's a very limiting way to hold sex. My definition of sex is way broader than that. And I feel like being queer has helped because, at least with some of my partners, um, queer sex could just include mouths and hands. And and there's nothing wrong with intercourse in all the delightful ways that it can manifest, not just the one bit in the other bit, right? Be it with toys or with different parts of the body. But yeah, I really like it because it actually opens up the playing field for the kinds of connections you can have with people. And I had a lover for about 5 years. We were totally into each other, and we never had intercourse once in 5 years. And it wasn't because we didn't want to. We both really wanted to, but for a variety of reasons, my attachment, and he was a lot more promiscuous than I was by his own profession. So I just didn't want to take that level of risk. And I love it. Oh, our participants are amazing. They're like, yeah, you could just be sensual, cuddle with people. Yes. Right? Breathing, just breathing with someone or deeply eye gazing. Like that for me can be incredibly intimate
Mm.
and even erotic. right? So
Totally
I
fair.
love it that when we start pulling apart these boxes and inviting people, I love what you were saying, Indigo, about how we can find the box that most fits us, right? Almost feels like doing away with the box kind of altogether, but just orienting people to some of who you might be in the world through the label we choose. I think that's awesome. Okay, I've got to catch up on what our participants are doing so great with the questions. Some of them are coming directly to me. So, you mentioned agender a little while ago, and can you speak to what that is? Because you said we'd come back to that. So,
So agender is basically, and so agender is another label I've used before. It's to me, when I look inside and I'm like, shine the flashlight, where is gender? Where is the gender? I do a lot of meditation and mindfulness and embodiment. And I've asked myself many times, like, where is my gender in my body, in my psyche? And I just can't find it. There's a way that for me, and this is different for everyone, but for me, the way I fall into agender is I am essence. I am everything. I am these hands. I am a void. I am a voice coming out of a body. I and anything else is stuff that other people really have put on me, and it's like this shirt. It's like, is this me? Green, is that me? White, is white skin, the race, is the way I'm racialized me? And the answer has always been no. The only thing that is me is the pure consciousness at my core. And for me, the closest thing when I look inside, when I look everywhere in me, the thing that is gender is the way that I have been oppressed, and the way other people have treated me is the way everyone else said, oh, you're a girl, oh, you're a woman, oh, I need you to be the follow in this dance, oh, I can move your body without asking you, or like I can touch you because I know you're a woman, so that's fine for me to do, or things like that. That's my, in me, gender is nothingness, or it's trauma. It's ways people have treated me that I would prefer they not.
so by people putting you in the binary box and expecting you to show
Yeah.
up a certain way because of their perception of you, that's it's actually very interesting that you're using the word that's actually traumatic for you, because it just sounds like it doesn't resonate at all.
And it's not only, so that's true for many, especially trans people, is that simply the fact that the world does not see them as their true self or their true body, their true gender, um, is deeply painful. And so that's called gender dysphoria. And that comes from like a medical diagnosis, but it refers to that mismatch, that like deep, that like, oh God, it's like a near existential pain of like, oh, this is the wrong body. This is the wrong way people treat me. This is the wrong way that I'm seen. Now, for me, it's not that so much. That's the reason I don't identify as trans, because that's a type of trauma that I haven't experienced. But for me, it's more just people have crossed my boundaries a lot of times, or I guess with partner dance, when they said, you're a follow, like go over in this corner. I did that for years and it was really fun. And then eventually I got to a breaking point. It was with swing dancing. I am a damn good follow and I'm very well trained, but I wish that when I came into that room, the teacher had said, so here's the dance. Let me show you. Demo. You can lead it or you could follow it. Those are the two parts of the dance. And leading involves taking responsibility, looking around the room, allowing creativity to flow through you in a bigger way, and controlling the dance in a bigger way. So it's more responsibility, it's also more creativity. And then had said, or you could start off training as a follow, which is it's a type of submission. It's you have less responsibility. You can go with the flow, and you're very important for the connection because you must complete the circuit of the creativity flows from the lead, and then you add your twist to it. And so, which of those do you want to try first? You can always change. And the best leads are also follows, and the best follows are also leads. Like, I really wish that, and that's how if I were a dance teacher, that's a partner dance teacher, that's how I would introduce it to people at the beginning. Because I think probably if I had been leading for 10 years or 5 years, I'm not sure what my cumulative following dance experience is. I've done so many dance styles. I think I would still be partner dancing, COVID permitting.
Right. Well, I actually love hearing you explain it like that. Like somebody wants to lead and somebody wants to follow, and you don't have to stay in one role. Because when I teach NeoTantra, it's so often taught in the binary, and because I don't subscribe to the binary, I'm like, well, let's just throw that out of the window. But there was a particular class where I really wanted to celebrate the pleasure of people with penises, because I have another class celebrating the pleasure of yonis. So I was like, okay, let's celebrate the people with penises. And what was really interesting was when we were selling tickets, we obviously needed enough people with uh, penises to receive so that they could, so we'd literally have enough landscape to work on in the class because it was a hands on class. But we sold tickets as givers and as receivers because we wanted there to be space for not just to assume that because we decided or we thought that somebody would identify as a man or as a woman or whatever, that they would necessarily want to take one or other of the roles. And a couple of times we had people sign up as givers, and their biology happened to be that they had a penis and they still wanted to give, right? It didn't make any difference. So by just shifting the languaging, it can make a huge difference to give people permission to be themselves, which is part of why I keep saying I really like queer men, because then they're not so intimidated by me being, you know, so much more manly than women are supposed to be. Oh my goodness. So we've got another fabulous question here, saying that they are curious what you, Indigo, can speak to about what two-spirit is and means in a cross-cultural discussion. And how that relates both to the conversation we're having, and obviously it comes from other traditions. Do you feel ready to answer that?
So my ancestry is white, is the racialized, and but it's like Celtic. My indigenous lineage is Celtic. So Native American gender traditions I'm less deep into. I haven't studied, uh, but it's two spirit is sort of, from what I understand, it's an umbrella term to refer to those within the Native American community who don't fit within the gender binary. And it's basically having like both masculine and feminine beingness.
Well, I love that representation, even just the word two spirit, like it gives permission in
Hmm.
one being for there to be more than just one identity. And I'm just not outing the person you and I have in common in community, but literally this person has five different names and five different uh, gender identities, and it's great. You just there's some keywords that'll cue you into which part of themselves they wanting to express or be in that moment, but it literally changes like even throughout the day. And I'm only sort of reacting like that because that a few years ago was the first time I'd experienced that from somebody. And so I think it's really lovely. We started this conversation talking about, um, pronouns and how do people identify. And I have another friend who I interviewed a few weeks ago. You might know them. Do you know Z Gris?
I love Z.
Yeah, I thought you would. And their gender identity is gender transcendent. I love it when I heard that. Right? They've transcended even this concept of gender. They're just who they are in the world. So I just love it how people are starting to play with all these labels and ideas and concepts because it does create a lot of permission. Um, so in about 10 minutes, we're gonna let participants actually ask their questions via video if you'd like. But if you're still feeling shy, you can keep putting them in the chat, and you can also send them to me privately if you're feeling even more shy. So, as somebody, Indigo, who identifies as genderqueer, I've got that part right, have I? Okay, great. Just making sure that I'm not making a faux pas. What is something that you like wish people that tend to have been socialized in the binary, what do you wish that they would know to either respect about you or to um, yeah, how to approach you, or something you just wish would make your life much simpler if we all just knew?
the way you the way you see me is a simplification in every way. The way I see myself is a simplification, but I can know myself more deeply. And especially like gender boxes, they are just wrong. They're just so wrong for me. And something that would be, so it's like question assumptions. It's like ask like, who is this being? What do they like? How might we connect? And leave room for the answer.
I love that. So it sounds like being curious about the person you're with and getting to know them instead of like preconceived ideas about who you think they are supposed to be.
Totally. And I know that's hard because um categorization is normal and necessary. It's like without categories and reduction, humans cannot perceive the world. The only world that we can access as humans is a reduced world. There's too much stimulation and information to possibly process it all. And so I know I do it, categorization, but being aware of internalized biases and implicit biases and making the implicit explicit, getting to know yourself and the internal assumptions and preferences and attractions. And I expect to be dismantling my internalized transphobia, my internalized misogyny, my internalized racism, my internalized all the stuff my whole life, because humans are such deeply social creatures that we really are impacted by culture. We really are impacted by our upbringings. And so I'm untangling all of it. And but I would say take a look, like, what's in here? How do I feel about trans people? How do I feel about non-binary people? How do I feel about my own gender? And just ask questions and like be gentle and get to know, because that's a deep service. Awareness and honesty and also intentionality. So the first step to changing something has to be awareness. I cannot do my anti-racism work until I recognize the ways in which I display racial bias. Like, I have to be mindful of them. And so the same thing is cultivate mindfulness, awareness, and then um, a way to be deeply loving and respecting is to at least question, if not open to alternatives to things like disgust at a trans body or rejection of a trans person as a possible partner. Those are the type of things that I would say I would endeavor to like notice in yourself, and then like love it for being there, and then say, is this mine? Did I choose this? And if I didn't, who benefits from this? Is it me? Is it people? Is this a loving impulse? Is this a loving way of being? Is this an abundant way of being? Or was it put there to enact violence, to perpetuate scarcity, to actually separate us? So is it a joyful, abundant, loving, or is it scarcity, violence, control, separation? And yeah, just asking, is this aligned with who I want to be?
I'm really loving the way you're answering the question, especially your own ownership of the things you're working on, because one of the things I really respect about the LGBTQ community is the fact that there's a lot of, or there seems to be a lot, and again, I'm making huge generalizations, but a lot of awareness, not only around sexual orientation, not only around, um, one's resonant gender, but also looking at things like racism and looking at like, what are the other things in me that are not all embracing, right? Because we all have those biases given the cultural milieu we've grown up in. And so bringing them to the light and becoming more conscious, I really love how you modeled that. I remember the very first time I was attracted to a woman, and I was quite young. I think I was only, wow, I've never said this publicly before. I've never told the story publicly before. Anyway, I told it to plenty of friends, but I remember I was in a club, and there was a person that I'm going to assume in that moment was a man sitting on one side of me and then a woman on the other side. And my story was I was supposed to want to kiss the guy, and I just wanted to kiss the girl. And I didn't do anything for like a year, because I was like, it was I mean, I was quite young. I'd come from South Africa, and I was brought up very Christian and pretty conservative, actually. I know people probably won't believe that, but I was. And I couldn't give myself permission in public to kiss her. But a year later, at another club, I met another delightful being, and we started engaging. And I'm like, no, not here. My friends are here. But I took her home with me, and I said, I've never done this before, but I'm open to trying. Let's just try and see what happens. And but still, I kept even this very new discovery, I wanted to keep it very separate and quiet, and I didn't tell a lot of people. And it took me years to actually be willing, even to like say, I say it very easy today, oh, I identify as queer, but I didn't share that with a lot of people for the longest time. So I think all of us come with so much programming and so many sort of culturally accepted norms, right? That we just don't even realize. And the truth is, I was living in London, like most of my friends probably wouldn't have cared if I kissed a girl. Like they were probably having a good time of their own, and they probably wouldn't have, like, it wouldn't have even been a big deal. I just had this whole construct in my head, and it took me a while to deconstruct that. Now, now there are videos on the internet of me kissing girls. So no, it's not so far out of that scope. Um, I also want to speak to. I'd love you to speak to what asexuality is. It's something, even as a sex educator, I only know a little bit about. But I consider myself a pretty sexual person. Most people know me as pretty unapologetic about my sexuality. I love to model that for others. And I remember being at an event one night, and I was chatting somebody up, and then they were like, I just need you to know that I'm asexual. And at the time, this was many years ago, I didn't even know what that was. And it kind of blew my mind. So can you speak a little bit to what that is for those that may be curious?
Totally. This is another thing I love educating about, because I find people will often realize, oh, okay, I think maybe that's me. So the asexual spectrum is basically anything except allosexual. So again, allosexual is those who have an emergent regular desire for sex with other people, or sexuality with other people. And thanks for telling us, Naomi. And the asexual spectrum is anyone who does not have an emergent regular desire or need for sexuality with another human or other humans. And that looks different for everybody, just like sexuality does. People, like, allosexual is supposed to be like the average or normal. Everyone is different. Everyone's sexuality is different. And so, but within the asexual spectrum, it ranges anywhere from, there's some people who I know who are like gross, like genitals are just gross and sex is so disgusting, and why would I ever want to do that? Or I know someone who they've told me, or he's told me, my penis feels like my elbow. So, I mean, if you feel like touching it, okay, but, it doesn't really feel good or bad or anything. It's, how does your elbow feel? So it's like anywhere from like just total like disinterest, disgust, disinterest, nah, like just not a fun or pleasurable thing, to there's another type, way of being asexual, which, so demisexual is within the asexual or ace spectrum. And demisexual just means somebody does not have a desire for sex unless it's with a person they deeply love and trust or are infatuated with. So I actually am gray sexual demisexual. So
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, you better slow all of that down for me. Gray
totally. So
sexual. I don't know what that is.
yeah, gray sexual is that I don't have a desire for sex except when I do. So it's like I don't have a need in the way that I've heard other people talk about, like, like I need to orgasm, or oh, I haven't had sex in so long that never I can go years like without having sex. And I mean, when I orgasm, it releases endorphins and oxytocin, and that's good for me and my immune system, and it feels good. But I don't have a need for it. It's sort of like running, actually, for me, uh, on
I
a day
never
to
have a
day.
need to run.
Yeah, right, right. But for me, when I run, I feel good, and it's
Uh-huh.
good for me. And it's also like any type of exercise. If I do the activity with another person, it can be deeply connecting. The more pleasure that I share with somebody, the more connecting it is. And I mean, for me, sex like links into some like primal connection thing. I think my body thinks like I'm gonna have a baby with somebody, if especially if we have PIV sex.
Sorry,
Um,
I know what PIV sex
yeah,
is, but not all
penis and
our
vagina.
penis
Like,
and vagina. This like stereotype of what sex is, right?
but really any sex is super bonding for me, but it's just not a need. And it's like for me, the demisexual, I only want it with someone I deeply love and trust, or someone who I am infatuated with. So I'm like falling in love with, or have a huge, it's not just a crush, it has to be a huge crush. And we have to be like hanging out, and I have to feel safe enough and trusting enough to to open.
It's really interesting hearing you speak about this need to this is my own story about it, but maybe I'll phrase it a different way. I have a friend in her 60s who happens to be a sex worker, and she is identifies as demisexual, and she's like, I've really got to have that emotional bond because I get so attached. And it's part of what's having queer sex is part of what's freed me up to have more sex because I do get much more attached when I have intercourse, whatever that means. But if it goes to a certain level, I'm like, oh, then I have all these expectations. So I do have to know then if that person's even available for that because maybe they're not. Maybe they just want to have fun. Nothing wrong with fun, but it's kind of good to negotiate that all out if you can beforehand. At least it is with me because I can get attached
Yeah.
to my own expectations. So yeah, I highlighted this friend of mine because she's in her 60s, and I think um, she happens to identify as a woman. But what I love about it is, I think sometimes in the polyamorous communities, like the word attachment or like needing emotional connection can sort of be seen as this taboo or this like bad thing that you've got to overcome. And I personally, I totally disagree with that. I think you need to understand your attachment patterns and what your actual needs are, and then find people to meet that. Right. And that's, for example, one of the reasons I didn't sleep with that guy for 5 years because he wasn't available for the kinds of emotional attachment I would have needed to take things, even deeper. But some of the best sex ever was incredibly creative. So we got a wonderful resource that I don't want to miss here. One of our participants saying that a person, sorry, called Angela Tucker made a feature-length documentary about asexuality. It's called Asexual, and I'll make sure this goes out to my patrons, but it's tuckergirl, GURL.com/asexual, just for those who may be watching the video at a later time. So I have been dominating, tend to like to dominate in many aspects. Anyway, but I do want to make some space. If people either want to keep putting questions in the chat, or if you just raise your hand, you could actually ask your question live to Indigo, and I don't want to take that gem away from you. So I will be watching for hands. I know you have so much wisdom to share with us, Indigo, but if people wanted to connect more deeply with you, even beyond this conversation, what are the best ways to do that? And let us know about like what you have coming up so we can keep following and supporting you.
Yeah, so like I mentioned at the beginning, I am a transformational coach, a personal coach. And so within my coaching, I love to work with people who believe in a more abundant, humane, beautiful world and want to take steps within themselves and the broader universe to make that happen. And so I will put in the chat if you want to just jump in and receive support on any of these topics, or just stepping into that abundance, that more humane world, dismantling some of your internalized stuff, you can just book a session with me. Let me format. Okay, formatting in the chat.
I know we changed devices right before for you, right before we jumped on.
So 2 options for that coaching. There's, if you want to just book right away, there's a 60-minute session, and that includes more info on there. And then there's also a free consultation for if you just want to dip your feet in and see if we're a good fit. And so the 60 minutes a paid offering. And I also have a website that includes both of those links, and then you can just check back there. There's my email list. It includes any way that you might want to get in touch with me or see my work in the world.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Because I know it can be a little nerve-wracking sometimes in a group space. Like I just shared my story about the first time I even thought about kissing a girl. I've told lots of people that, but never on a live video. So sometimes we get shy to ask our questions live. But I really want to encourage our participants. You've got lots of ways, and I'm just going to keep asking otherwise because I have more questions. But one of the things, and let me back up and say I was so blessed when I first started running my own events that I actually happened, it was just by circumstance, but I happened to have an assistant that was trans, and they were way more knowledgeable than me about many things. But after each class we would sit down and then they would give me feedback on the things that I was, especially the things where I was missing the mark. You know, because I was trained by teachers that taught in a very heteronormative way. Like, for example, I had 2 lesbian women in my class one day, and I was talking about a particular technique, and I said, oh, yes, when the penis goes in the vagina. And they were like, or in the vulva. Anyway, they were like, well, that's not how those 2 have sex. You lost them at the beginning of the class by making that the only option. So I'm sharing that as an example whereby, even though I was pretty open-minded, I didn't realize that some of my languaging was still making people feeling excluded in the room. So I feel very blessed by this person that gave me, you know, like a year and a half of feedback every time I taught to help me refine. And I'm still learning. One of the things that I struggle with, and I feel a little bit bad saying this, but I'm going to be human. And that is, some people who identify as trans they pass really well, and one would never know at all. And then some people might, let's just pick another end of the spectrum, where some people might be just starting to experiment with their gender, right? Or maybe to give themselves permission, that if they were assigned, say, as a male at birth, now they might start taking on more characteristics, like they might start changing the way they dress, for example. So, where I struggle, Indigo, is when my brain, when the messages in the boxes that have been imprinted in my brain are telling me, if somebody has a mustache, for example, that's a man, right? That's kind of my 43 years on the planet, that's kind of what the dominant culture tells us all the time. And then let's just say, and there's nothing wrong with men choosing to wear a dress if they want to do that, more power to them. But there are sort of these boxes that just my brain sort of ticks off, like, honestly, this is quite edgy because I love to be welcoming, but sometimes I will always ask somebody or I do my best to always ask somebody what their preferred pronoun is, instead of just assuming it's he or she, because that isn't true for everybody, right? But if my brain is telling me that what I'm seeing is what I would normally put in the box of he, and then I'm being invited, say, to use a pronoun that's she or they, what do we do, or what are some of the tricks to help us from the way we are programmed to still honor the person's pronoun, or honor the way they're choosing to present themselves to the world on that day? Because that's a high value of mine. I want to do it, and sometimes my brain is just like, it's not. Am I making sense what I'm saying?
Yes.
Okay, good, because I'm feeling very clumsy while I'm doing it.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing the vulnerable question. And um, just so I remember, a tune-up. Um, I know for me and the spaces that I've run in, that saying pronouns versus preferred pronouns tends to be like better for like queer people that I've known, just because it's like saying, what's your preferred name? It's not like a preferred name, it's just that your name. So in that, pronouns are like a substitution for a name, or pronouns in an ideal world are honoring to whoever uses them or is referred to by them.
So
Um,
even the word preferred doesn't feel like just their pronoun.
yeah, because preferred, it implies that it's a request, or it implies that there's something else um, that either takes precedence or is prioritized. It's like, what's your preferred name versus what's your name? It's like it delegitimizes it a little bit.
Thank you for that refinement. So a better question is,
What are your
what
pronouns?
pronoun would you like me to use?
Yeah, or what are your pronouns? What pronouns would you like me to use? Sure, yeah.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
Um, but in answer to your question, yeah, that's where what I do with that, and my partner changed from using they to using she um, recently, and I've noticed what bars me is my internalized misogyny. And so it's what I've done is take a look at why is this difficult for, and on one degree it's just like, oh, this is just what I was taught, what was drilled into me, or For my partner, I've known her for like 4 years, and we've just like been super intimate and around each other all the time and living together. And but there's a way is misogyny as well, because I came upon this part of me inside that was like, no, um, that person's not a she, because that person's a full person. Or and like transitioning, I did some dismantling work, and sometimes awareness, like, whew, allows it to soften and or dissolve or have less power just within that process. But I think it's going to be different in different contexts. But it's always useful to ask the question, okay, well, why is this difficult? Why is this here? And we're humans, we're mammals. There are limitations. I don't remember everybody's name in a like 30-person group if we do go around, unless I'm like, okay, Sheila, Joey, got, okay, Sheila, Joey, okay. Like I have to work or write it down. And I only really do that when I'm facilitating. So but there are true limitations on cognition and memory and habit formation and changing habits. I don't actually remember your question
Oh, that's okay.
exactly.
You partially answering it. It's just so if I'm at an event, and let's say a party, right, a Friday night, and I meet someone, and my brain is programmed that the
Hmm.
characteristics that my eyes are seeing, say I'm picking mustache, right, but would fit into the box, which may or may not even be true, but of man, and yet the person, and I'm making up an example here, but is saying they want to use a she pronoun,
Yeah.
and maybe they, and I'm just making this up, but maybe they're wearing a dress. So
Hmm.
there's like this dissonance with the boxes that I've been
Yeah.
sort of appropriated to, you know. And I there's a deep part of me that really wants to get it right and to honor what's true for them, but it's like a, does it make sense? It's like a brain thing. Like my brain is reading one thing and I'm hearing a
Totally.
different thing, and I don't know how to bring the two together.
I think for me, part of that has been exposure. It's like the more I'm around trans people, genderqueer people, gender fluid person, the more that it just feels easier. And that's been part of this process of the switching from they to she with my partner, has been noticing, oh wow, there's this part of me that really is still attached through my biases, is really still attached to the man woman thing, or at least the he she they. There's some part of me that's like, this means this and this is this box. And so I think that's normal with the categories. And what I do and what I would advise is just notice it and care for it, show care for it, acceptance for that tendency, and examine it, see what's beneath or behind it, to the degree that you have that space and capacity. And then just, do your best to be gender affirming and like respectful and align with the pronouns that person is using. And it's harder uh, uh, less common pronouns. I noticed like uh, z, and things like, people have all different kinds of pronouns, like
I had a
fae.
student once say to me, my pronoun is ʻeঃ, and
Right.
that's the only pronoun I want you to use. And I had never heard that one before.
Yeah.
And we were in a 3 hour session, and I really wanted to get it right because, I'd asked them and now they'd told me. And it was a very important part of their work was they
Yeah.
needed to really be seen. So, but I just never used it. So I managed,
It's
I managed
hard.
okay. And
Yeah.
it's because Z I had at least heard of. I used
Right.
Z and Scrabble with my mother-in-law who's 90, and she's like, that's not a word. I'm like, it's in the dictionary. It's a word. So I love it that I want Scrabble
Yeah.
with Z.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's another area where I notice I can be challenged is when I meet somebody who identifies one way and then they shift. This has
Mhm.
happened. They transition their gender, or they just change the label that they're currently using. You know, that it can just be hard to kind of catch up because I often make this joke in the Bay Area. At least people have their birth name, their chosen name, their spiritual name, their Burning Man name, their kink name. Like I'm like, give me one name. I just want. It's hard enough for me to remember the one name. So when the pronouns get shifted, and again, I do work on it. One of the things I read recently, like, because I do make mistakes, even with dear friends of mine, and
Mhm.
when you make mistake, like if you use the wrong pronoun, just notice it, apologize, and move on. You don't have to like make this
Yeah.
big song and dance and send them flowers the next day or whatever. And if you're unsure, another workaround that I've used is using the person's name. If you are getting tripped up, right? Just keep using their name and then you don't have to worry. So there are
Yeah.
some tricks to support yourself, especially if this is new.
Yeah. And that something that's come up in my brain a couple times is I I would advise this with any person who has an observable difference, anyone who's especially marginalized or is in a minority identity or ethnicity or gender or whatever um, group. I would advise, and this is something I teach, to ask permission explicitly before asking them about that identity, about that marginalization, about that observable difference, that axis of oppression, especially um, because it's a burden for many people in the way that, and this is the way I teach it, is I have broken bones many times. And when I have a cast, if I have it for a month or more, then the first thing everyone asks me is, what happened to your arm? 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 And it just gets so old. It's like, that's not why I came to this festival. And I just feel frustrated. And so I went to a festival with a cast and I wrote in big letters, do not ask about. And it's the same for visibly trans people, for people who use they, them, for people who are Black or brown in majority white spaces. It's like, we don't come there to talk about gender. We don't, I mean, unless I, right now I do, but like, if I just show up to an ecstatic dance event, I haven't shown up to be the sounding board for people to come and say, oh, you're not like the other days. You seem nice, or oh, what is a trans? I'm not really sure. Could you please educate me? That I would suggest Google, or like I said before, to ask. So if somebody comes up and says, hey, I don't really understand they, would you be willing to talk about that with me? Or I have a question about being non-binary. Do you have time for that? Do you have space for that right now? Asking to ask a question.
Mhm.
And knowing that it may accepting a no, because we get asked stuff all the time if we're visible. And some people don't have a choice about whether they're visible, especially visibly uh, trans, Black people. They just are bombarded all the time with people who are well meaning, but people who come up and, for whatever, like, just say, hey, what do you think of Martin Luther King? Or like, I have a Black friend. It's a way of saying, you are not like me, you are not like us, just a reminder. And I want you to, especially when people come and ask about gender, it's like, you are asking me to educate you. And that's a type of labor.
I really appreciate you saying that, especially. I love your example of having the cast on your arm, because the number one question I get everywhere in the world is, where are you from? And it's normally like, because of my accent, it's normally like the first or second thing. Like sometimes they even say that before, like that's the first thing out of their mouths. And I get it that it's interesting or whatever, but it's like, I'm such an interesting person. There's so many more interesting things. And I answer that question every single day. So please ask me something else. Like, why are you
Yeah.
here? What makes you passionate or something, you know?
Yeah.
So that really brings it yeah, brings it home for me. And then just checking in. I have a lot of, I'm in general, I'm a pretty good listener, and um I tend, we were talking about this before we got on, about having this British politeness thing. So I can sit and like hold space for somebody. And I had dinner with a friend of mine in Mexico the other night, and she's clearly going through a lot. She has some major health issues, but she talked at me for 2 hours. And at the end, I said to her, you know, it's Saturday night, and it really sounds like you have a big need to be heard, and you have a lot going on, totally understandable. But I agreed to come and have dinner with you. And I've just done 2 hours of emotional labor. And while I am good at that, that's my day job. So you're welcome. Come and book a session with me. But then I'm consenting to that thing. And what I consented to was dinner with my friend on Saturday night. And I was honestly proud of myself, because normally I've had friendships where I've just kind of sat there and just listened for months and months and months on end. But it is important to check to see if somebody has the bandwidth for your question. Or maybe
Yeah.
you just wanted to be at ecstatic dance and just have a good old dance and not talk to anybody, instead of having to like be the spokesperson for the entire LGBTQ plus community, right?
Totally. And that, if you really want to be friends with someone from a minority group or who has an observable difference, it's probably not going to be, they're probably not going to be super excited if one of the only things you ask them is about their observable difference. Like, that's not going to be the most connecting conversation starter, even though it's a really easy one, because they're different. I totally get it, but probably not the way to win their favor.
Well, I want to really thank you, Indigo, for like literally giving us the inside scoop, for answering like the ABC questions, and then we got some great questions from our participants. I know there's so much more we could all learn from you. So please do make sure that you follow Indigo, and feel free to book a session with her, with, I beg your pardon, there, I've done it, with them, so that you can dive even deeper. Or I know we actually have some facilitators and teachers that are on the call with us. And if you're wanting to learn even more deeply, then connect with Indigo and learn how you can keep doing it better, because you've watched, I've made plenty of mistakes even in this. And thank you for the feedback we're getting. I'm seeing brilliant discussion and appreciating you both. We appreciate everybody who's tuning in, be it live. I so appreciate my patrons. You honestly have no idea how much. And I'm quite personally tickled by who's chosen to show up here today and excited to see who else this will touch even beyond our live experience. So thank you for your generosity, Indigo. Thank you for all the work you've done on you so that you can help us unpack our own stuff so we can show up as better humans and be more inclusive and loving in the world, because for me that's very important. So thank you. Oh, and all the hearts are coming, all the love's coming. Mwah! We'll send love out. Oh, yes, we can send loving hearts out. We all need more of that. It's been one hang of a intense time these last 18 months. Um, so I will just give the little tidbit to my patrons saying that Marla Renee, who was going to be on one of the panels I ran recently about, when it'll be safe to run in-person events again, Marla actually went into labor the day we were running the panel. So I'm bringing Marla back this coming Saturday at 10 a.m. and I will be posting some more details about that shortly. And then we'll be chanting together on the 29th at 6 p.m. Pacific time. I specially packed my harmonium, brought it all the way. I'm traveling and on the road, so I brought it all the way so we can keep chanting together and help us get out of those boxes that we all tend to live in far too much. Have a blessed week. Happy Pride to all of those celebrating. And thank you again so much, Indigo.
Bye.